Has World War III already begun?
This scenario is inevitable. There is already a plan, there is already a strategy. This war continues to escalate. Even more countries will be drawn into this process.
What role will Ukraine play in World War III?
Ukraine will be a leader, an authority, and a mentor for many countries.
Yaroslav, please tell us, how do you feel? Is this already the beginning of World War III, or are these some other processes?
As a matter of fact, the Third World War had already begun well before the outbreak of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, but it was not yet manifested in a physical sense. Not as physical aggression, not as an open war. It was taking place in the political sphere, in the economic sphere, and now it has already taken on an open form. And this open form began precisely with the war between Ukraine and Russia, in Ukraine. And now this war continues to escalate. It keeps manifesting itself on a more material level, and we see that new countries are beginning to get drawn into this process. And this really is a world war. And what I see, what I have looked at through the Akashic records, what I see is that it will continue to expand, and even more countries will be drawn into this process because it is a process. At this stage, it is already inevitable, meaning it has to happen, it has to draw in those countries that are involved in some way. They have to go through this experience, and I think it will last for a few more years until it all transforms into something new.
Will there be an official announcement? Like,
In the case of a world war? No, they won't do that. Well, someone will talk about it, yes, probably more journalists or some individual commentators, but for all countries to officially recognize it, no, that won't happen.
can you say which countries will be involved in this?
This will be the war itself, a world war, and it will affect different parts of our planet, different countries. Some will participate directly with combat operations taking place right on the territory of those countries, while others will take some will take a passive role in this, providing weapons, assistance, people, and so on. As for which specific countries, of course, besides those already involved in this process, China will also participate, but most likely in a passive way, somewhere on the territory of other countries. They can do this, and they can also help someone with weapons or participate in some other way. I see that countries connected with the Muslim tradition, with Islam, many of these countries will be drawn into this process. They may even become the main players, the primary ones in this. With the sword, with weapons that will carry this energy of destroying the old system. In fact, we are already seeing this, it is already happening, but even more countries will be drawn in. Most likely countries of the Middle East, such as Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, these countries will be involved in some way. Turkey will be involved, and there will also be war in Europe, but not all of Europe. Not all European countries will take an active part in this directly. Some will be direct participants in the fighting, while others will again help with weapons or in some other way.
War is always about both politics and ideology. How do you see it? What political and ideological reasons or shifts are happening right now that the world is following such a scenario?
Right now, we are looking at the political platform, and where is the redistribution? It's about the redistribution of the world and the redistribution of influence in this world. That is, the world is governed by certain groups of people who represent specific countries. We know about Russia, China, America, England, and so on. And now it's as if there is a redistribution of the world happening, a redistribution of influence over territories where these groups of people hold power. In other words, they are redistributing it among themselves. Sometimes they reach agreements, sometimes they use war to do it, and in this way they also implement certain plans of their own, and sometimes they need to eliminate a certain number of people. For example, as is happening in Ukraine, somewhere they need to let weapons through, somewhere they need to test weapons, somewhere they need to clear out a territory, somewhere they need to redistribute minerals and other material resources. And elsewhere, they simply need to change the government in order to establish their own control over these territories.
Is the expansion of this conflict inevitable? Or perhaps are there scenarios in which this course of events can be changed?
No, at this stage, this scenario is already inevitable. Many forces are already involved in this. There is already a plan. There is already a strategy among those who influence this process. Everything is essentially mapped out already. Some details of this scenario will change along the way, but overall, it has already been set in motion. When the second war in Iran, as we call it, began, that was when this scenario, which is now inevitable, was set in motion.
What role will Ukraine play in the Third World War?
Ukraine will be a leader. Ukraine will be the one with unparalleled experience. Already, thanks to this war it is currently involved in, Ukraine will become an authority and mentor for many countries on matters of war, defense, weaponry, and strategy. That is, thanks to this situation, Ukraine will become such an authority in the world that everyone will respect, everyone will take into account, and everyone will want to see in certain alliances, in military alliances of countries. Therefore, from this point of view, one can say that Ukraine's position will be quite advantageous. Ukraine will also produce and supply its own weapons.
If we talk about people, about Ukrainian soldiers, about those who are now defending our country, will they take any direct part specifically in military operations? Not in training, not in sharing experience?
Yes, there will be special units that will be able to do so under contract. Participation will be voluntary, no one will be forced, and people who see this as an opportunity for themselves as their job will be able to join these units and take part in the war on other territories. However, I don't see Ukraine itself directly engaging in combat operations with other countries, except for Russia.
How do you see it? Why essentially has such a key role been assigned to Ukraine in World War III? Why Ukraine specifically? Why will we be the ones passing on this knowledge? Because there have been wars in other countries over time as well, major ones.
Those other wars that took place in other countries during this time cannot be compared to what is happening and has happened between Russia and Ukraine. There has never been anything on this scale. The transformation of war is happening in parallel with the transformation and development of technology. And in this regard, Ukraine is very flexible and adapts very quickly. And future wars are about technology. It's a war of robots, a war of drones. And right now, Ukraine is advancing in this area very quickly and effectively.
What do you think? Will there be direct clashes between major powers? By major powers, I mean the United States, some European unions, in other words, the key players in the market. Will they fight each other directly?
What I see is that Europe and Russia, there has to be this conflict, there has to be this war. Perhaps a settling of scores between America and China, but most likely this will happen on some other territory. They will do it at the expense of others, at the expense of another people, another country, as they in principle often like to do.
Why do they so often like to do it this way? How can this be explained from the perspective of the spiritual world, let's say?
Well, if we take a much broader and higher perspective on the situation, they actually do this specifically because, you see, there are certain, one might say, groups of peoples who have a certain karma. And for example, Americans, just as residents of America who do not make decisions about whether to enter a war or not, they do not have the kind of karma that requires them to go through a war. They have their own difficulties, their own challenges, but they have a different karma. There are peoples who have to go through this experience. This war, well, that's if we speak from the perspective of the global laws of the universe and so on. And according to these laws, so to speak, the countries that are destined to experience war fall under this category. We too, as Ukrainians, have found ourselves having to go through this experience.
This is the fate of countries and the people who live in these countries. The fate of a country is shaped by the fate of its people. What qualities do the people who will take direct part in the Third World War possess? What behavioral patterns do they have? In other words, what exactly influences this?
There are several categories of people in this regard. Some people are simply victims, those who live with a victim mentality, who find themselves in quite a childish position. The world around me is so hostile, it's dangerous, only the strongest survive, and I am always dependent on others. The government influences me, certain circumstances affect me, I can't decide anything. And events like war come to such people, to those who have this collective mindset, in order to teach them independence so that they mature as a people in their consciousness. The second category of people who incarnate into life in such countries where there is to be war, are more like a kind of star landing party, like rescuers who, at that moment, provide certain support. So to speak, like the Red Cross, only these are souls who come from more developed planets in order to help these people get through these trials during difficult times. They spread knowledge, they spread a certain energy so that there isn't too much hatred there. They, so to speak, soften these events so that it is easier to go through this experience.
You said that Ukraine will be a mentor, let's put it that way now, because there is a war in Ukraine. We can conclude that the categories you just mentioned are present here. And does this mean if we move to another plane, the plane of mentorship, does it mean that we have already changed?
Well, we have definitely already changed, and for sure, Ukraine and Ukrainians are not the same as they were before the war started, before the full-scale invasion began. But this process is not yet finished. It's like, when a child is transferred from the school bench to some university, a college, somewhere farther from their parents, where a person has to learn to live on their own, make decisions independently, and take responsibility for themselves. And so it's as if we've already been moved from the school bench to a higher level, a different level of responsibility for our own lives. But we haven't fully found our bearings here yet. That is, we've just ended up in this student dormitory, found ourselves in this university, and right now we're here. Thank you. We're starting to figure out what's what here, how things are organized, how this is different from school, and how we should adapt now. And now this period of adaptation is just beginning.
If we talk about the economic consequences of the global world war, what can you say? Please take a look. What awaits us from an economic perspective? Will we become poorer, richer? Will the currency change, or something else?
Are we looking at this from a global perspective or specifically for Ukraine?
Let's separate it, because our people live both abroad, those who were forced to leave Ukraine because of the war, and those who remain in Ukraine.
Well, Ukraine has a bit of a unique situation because here, after all, a different kind of war is taking place. It's not entirely directly connected to the global one, although everything is interconnected. And Ukraine is facing an economic crisis precisely after the war ends, and it will last for some time. About 2 years, and this period will be economically difficult. During this time, there will be a zone of turbulence where there will be upheaval with money, the hryvnia will depreciate, and it will be replaced either by some kind of digital currency, another one, or the same hryvnia, but already updated, reset. Similar processes will also take place in the world, but they won't affect all countries equally. Some will be impacted more, others less, and the changes will be significant. There will be major fluctuations, both economic and political. For example, somewhere fuel prices have tripled, and then 2 days later they dropped threefold. There were some difficulties with food or medicine, but then they were quickly resolved, so there will be such fluctuations. I don't see any kind of prolonged crisis, like some people say famine. Yes, famine.
By the way, I wanted to ask, do you see famine?
No, I don't see famine, but there might be some partial disruptions in food supply, energy resources, electricity, and gas supply. They can happen all over the world in different regions.
What advice can you give people to survive this economic crisis, which, as we can see, is inevitably coming?
The main thing to understand right now is that the world is in a zone of change. The world is in such a state in the process of transformation. These changes will be global. They will permeate all spheres of our lives, and they will affect every person. It doesn't matter, millionaires or ordinary citizens of their countries. These changes will sweep everything up under themselves. And here it's very important to adapt. That is, it's very important not to be rigid, not to just hold on. Like, I'm used to doing it this way, and that's the only way I'll do it. Or, I'm used to living here, so I'll only live here. You need to be flexible. You need to adapt. You need to be able to understand at every moment, aha, I can do this differently here and here. How can I do it? And in fact, this experience will contribute to our development. Because we only grow when we lose that stability, when we lose the certainty that everything will always be just as it is now. When we lose that, certain energy channels are activated in us, certain areas of our brain become active. We start to develop.
How do you do that? You said you shouldn't be rigid, you should be flexible. How do you become more flexible?
You need to train your consciousness. This can be done through certain practices, meditations that help you distance yourself from the events of your life as if you are taking the position of an observer. For example, you can do a practice like this. Imagine sitting down, relaxing, closing your eyes, and imagining that as if you leave your body and are simply nearby, observing what is happening to your body. Just imagine as if you are looking at yourself from the outside. And at the same time, try to maintain this state for as long as possible. And then you will see that, as if all those anxious thoughts, all those worries, it's like they stayed there in that body. And I am just watching. I feel it all, I see it all, but now I am looking at it from the outside. You can also do a practice where you imagine that you are like the sky. And again, all your thoughts and worries are like clouds that simply pass by you. That is, you feel that you have them, that something is bothering you somewhere, some fears about the future and so on. But at the same time, you feel yourself as the sky, expansive, spacious, where somewhere inside you, there are these little clouds drifting by, but these clouds are not a part of you. They simply exist within your space. They form and then dissolve, but the sky itself does not change because of this.
Those of you who try any of the two practices that Yaroslav suggested, please write to us in the comments about your feelings. What can you say? What result will we get? It will be interesting to read. Thank you for your advice. And let's talk about the information war in the context of this global world war. Because right now we can't avoid talking about the flow of information, since it is actually what shapes the energy, in a sense. What is the main thing, what is important to say to people about this topic so that they know it?
The information field is exactly, that is the place where World War III began, and which is probably still the main battlefield, because the information space, it determines the overall mood, it sets the direction of people's thoughts, it shapes the collective mind. If fear is being sown through the media, then in the space among people in society, fear will prevail. If fear prevails, then people become easy to control. It's easy to sway them, to push them towards something. It's hard for people to orient themselves in this environment of fear. What do they actually need to do? Which direction is better to move in? It's easy to make money off them.
Off them.
It's easy to make money off them, yes. They can be manipulated. That's why the information space remains a very powerful tool. And we must remember that whenever we encounter any kind of information, it always affects us. You can't say, oh no, that only affects my neighbor, nothing affects me because I'm so well programmed and reprogrammed. No, everything affects us consciously or unconsciously. Everything has an impact on us. And when I tell you, imagine a piece of lemon in your mouth, each of you starts to salivate, regardless of whether you've protected yourself from my words or not.
After this exercise, you should drink some water.
So please be very mindful of the different sources of information that you choose to interact with.
Tell me, please, do you think this whole transformational process will end in destruction? I mean, like they show in movies where all of humanity is on the brink of catastrophe. Or is it still about a brighter period, something you could compare to spring, which will inevitably come after a long winter?
The main thing that must be destroyed according to the divine plan, let's put it that way, in this world war, is the system by which humanity currently lives. The system of our existence can be called by different names: capitalism, democracy. I call it a consumerist way of life where consumption has become the foundation of existence. It's as if people have lost their sense of purpose. They no longer strive for development, they simply consume all these endless assortments of goods, food, services, and so on. It's as if people have found the meaning of life in this and have stopped developing. That's why the whole global reason and the idea behind the war is for people to change, for people to come to their senses and realize, no, we can't go on living like this. We can't keep moving forward this way. We need to change the system. We need to change our way of life. We need to change the interactions between states, between people, and between people and the government. So that is, in general, all systems need to change now.
Give us a positive collective progression like that. What will it be like after the war ends? What kind of world awaits us?
Let's take the most positive branch of reality, because things can turn out differently depending on what we
will be like. It's a progression. It has to be positive. So please set us on a positive progression.
Yes, because it depends on the decisions we make. Ideally, the fundamental system of social interaction between individuals and the very structure upon which our modern society is built must undergo a significant and necessary transformation. This transformation should be designed in such a way that the governing bodies should be completely defragmented and thoroughly decentralized. Essentially, this means that the traditional relationship between state leaders and the general public needs to be fundamentally reimagined and changed. To escape from a totalitarian regime, from what Russia and other such totalitarian countries are imposing now, there should be many governments, many such associations responsible for certain territories. This situation can be closely compared to the United States of America, where each individual state has its own specific laws and its own local government. But the goal here is to be even more independent, that is to say, even freer than that. We are talking about being even more independent, so that the people living in a certain area can truly choose for themselves how they want to live. And when they want to choose who is responsible for them, so that these government representatives are truly representatives of the people, so that they constantly listen to what the people want, and so that they meet these demands. Roughly speaking, these are people hired by the people. Like the head of the housing office, a person can come and say to the head of the housing office, "Why is my roof leaking in the building? Do something about it." This is how it should work, not the way where people are afraid of the government that they...
So the authorities should really be closer and more accessible, is that right?
Closer, more accessible, and simpler. These relationships should be simple. And of course, if we have a single president who decides everything, then every person, every citizen can't get an appointment with the president to say that their roof is leaking or something else is wrong. But if it will be more independent, that is, when, let's say, there is a mayor or an even more decentralized system of governance, then you can reach out more often, more directly, and it's easier to get some response and action on problems. Overall, if humanity now chooses the path of development, if all these events eventually lead us to some brighter path, then we will begin to build a new, different relationships with each other. We will begin to build different relationships with nature. Technologies will no longer separate us from ourselves and from the world. Instead, technologies will become auxiliary mechanisms that will help us, on the contrary, to develop, to learn about the laws of energy, the laws of the universe, which in principle are already obvious to many masters and people who work with these laws. But technologies can also be used for this purpose in combination with these laws of energy. In this way, we can arrive at a certain scenario where we will not destroy this world, but instead we will cooperate, where we will exist in such a creative mood, in a creative consciousness, and simply unite together in order to create something beautiful, useful, and something that will help us develop.